Live from the TV30 studio, here is Jim Schneider.
Well, hi and welcome to inFocus. We're glad that you joined us tonight as we have some very important and very relevant information to be talking about. You see, we can hardly go by a week. Sometimes it seems virtually daily we are seeing Israel making the headlines in the news, not only across this nation, but around the world as well. Just think about that for a moment. A country about the size of New Jersey making international headlines on a regular basis, at least weekly, and as I said, many times more often than that, virtually on a daily basis. We're going to focus in on Israel tonight. We're going to be taking a look at the Jewish Fall Feast this evening, as well as their significance, not only to Israel, but are they a picture of something else? Further, we're going to be taking a look at some of the current goings-on, the continuing antagonism that is being expressed toward Israel from nations all around the world. Are we seeing alliances being formed to one day come against Israel? We'll be taking a look at some of those issues here tonight, so we trust you'll be able to join us, and later we'll give you opportunity to participate in the broadcast. It's our privilege to have back in our inFocus studios Andy Ferrier, who is a representative for the Midwest Messianic Center. He lived in Israel, worked there for 3 years, also speaks to churches and conferences on Israel and Bible prophecy. And Andy, nice to have you back here on inFocus.
Good to be back, Jim, and we got some exciting things, I think, to talk about tonight.
Absolutely, we do. And we are seeing, as I mentioned, it's not an overstatement to say Israel's regularly in the news. I mean, because we are seeing this tiny little nation in perspective of the world that is making headlines all over the globe.
Yeah, it's interesting. The population of Israel is only about 6 million. The population of China is over 1 billion, give or take 6 million. So the population of Israel is the statistical heir of the population of China, and yet who makes more news and headlines than, of course, Israel.
Well, we'll look at some of the current goings-on with Israel, but first of all, let's focus in on the Fall Feast. We're entering the time of the Fall Holidays, or Fall Feast, as they're often referred to, where we have the Jewish New Year, the Feast of Trumpets. We also have the Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement, and also Sukkah, the Feast of Tabernacles. We'll look more at those, but you brought a slide with you tonight, slide number 2, that kind of gives us an overview of the feast, the celebrations, the major holidays for Israel.
Yeah, so if our viewers can see the slide, you'll see that God gave 7 feasts to the nation of Israel, and these can be found in Leviticus chapter 23, 4 of them in the spring, 3 of them in the fall. And what's interesting about them is it's really a blueprint for God's plan for the ages, because they spoke about things that were going to happen in the future. So, for example, in the spring with Passover, the first feast, as Israel came out of Egypt, they celebrated Passover, and God told them, take this little lamb and sacrifice it, put the blood around your door. Well, 1,400 years later, Jesus comes, and he says, I am the lamb, and he was sacrificed on Passover, on the very day. And then they counted, it was the day after the Sabbath was the Feast of First Fruits. Passover's not always on the same day because they're on a lunar calendar. It can jump around, but the Feast of First Fruits was always on the day after the Sabbath. When did Jesus arise from the dead? The day after the Sabbath. The Apostle Paul says in 1 Corinthians 5, for even Christ our Passover is sacrificed for us, in 1 Corinthians 15, that Jesus is the first fruits of them that rise from the dead. So Jesus is sacrificed on a Jewish feast day, Passover. He arises from the dead on a Jewish feast day, the Feast of First Fruits. Then they counted 50 days after First Fruits, and they came to the Feast of Pentecost. And I think most of our viewers know what happened on the Feast of Pentecost. Acts chapter 2, the Spirit of God comes down, the church is born. And so it's interesting that in the first 4 feasts, the spring feasts, they were fulfilled in the first coming of Jesus, and they were all fulfilled on exactly the day. And so as we head to the fall feasts, which will be fulfilled in the second coming of Jesus, there's speculation, could they be fulfilled on the very day?
Very interesting. Let's go through those fall feasts one by one. And the first one we know is the Jewish New Year, or the Feast of Trumpets.
Yes. Now, God said to Israel that the new year was supposed to be Passover. This was supposed to be the beginning of the year, but for some reason, the rabbis changed it to Rosh Hashanah, which is the Feast of Trumpets. So they really kind of have like two New Years. They have the religious New Year, which is Passover, but then the civil New Year is the Feast of Trumpets, known today as Rosh Hashanah, or as a lot of people like to say, Rosh Hashanah. Mm-hmm. But Rosh in Hebrew means head, and then Hashanah, the year. That's the head of the beginning of the year. And this feast also jumps around. It's not always on the same day. This year, very exciting, it is next Monday night, October 3rd.
At sundown?
Actually begins at sundown Sunday evening.
Okay.
And so Monday will be October 3rd, the first day. It's for 2 days. And as the Jewish people go to the synagogue, there's a lot of prayers said, and then they blow the shofar. Now, I brought my trusty shofar with me. This is a horn from an animal. And on the Feast of Trumpets, there are 70 trumpet blasts that are sounded throughout the day, and there are 4 different types of trumpet blasts on this feast. So, if you don't mind, let me demonstrate these for you. The first one is called a tekiah, and it's one long blast. Then there's what's called a shevarim, which is 3 short calls. And there's a tura, which means an alarm, and it's 9 short calls. And kind of hard to do, but we'll give it a try. Okay, and then the 70th trumpet blast is called the tekiah gadolah, the last or great trumpet, and is sounded around 12 o'clock noon on Rosh Hashanah, the Feast of Trumpets, and it's supposed to be blown as long and as loud as you can do it. So let's see how much hot air we got tonight. All right, so could have went a little longer, but we don't want people to flip the channel or anything. But what's interesting is that the Apostle Paul has said in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 that the rapture would happen at the last trumpet. And so there's many in the Bible prophecy community that speculate, well, could he be talking about the Feast of Trumpets? And since the first 4 feasts were fulfilled on the very day, could it be that the rapture would happen on the very day of the Feast of Trumpets? Well, we can't say for sure, okay? We can't be dogmatic. A lot of this teaching comes from Zola Levitt, who's a Jewish believer. He's with the Lord now. We can't set a date. People have tried to set dates for the rapture for years, and Jesus himself said no man knows the day or hour of his coming. But I'm always a little more excited around the Feast of Trumpets and always looking up a little bit more. But it's very interesting when you look at those parallels with the feasts.
So the Jewish significance of the Feast of Trumpets is?
It has to do with atonement for sin. And when Jewish people go to the synagogue on this feast, they say, may your name be inscribed in the book of life. And after the synagogue service, they'll go down to a river and they'll take pieces of bread and they'll throw it in the river, and it signifies the carrying away of the sin. And it's also leading up to the next feast we'll talk about. Next one is Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, that day, the most holy day in the Jewish year when God's going to take away the sin of Israel.
Andy Ferrier is with us. We have that calendar right there, or the Feast of Israel on the screen. So let's talk about this Day of Atonement. What is its significance and to Jewish people? And they had to go through certain rituals, did they not?
Yeah, you can read this in Leviticus chapter 16. It's very detailed what was supposed to be done on this day. And just briefly, it was the only day that the high priest could go into the Holy of Holies in the temple. And if we have our slide of the temple, you see there. Remember when you entered into the courtyard of the temple, then you came into the first room, which was the holy place, but then the innermost room was called the Holy of Holies. Only the high priest could go in there, and only one day a year on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And before he went in there, he had to make a number of sacrifices. And then on that day, they would bring 2 goats to the temple, and they would cast lots for those goats. The goat that was chosen was called God's goat, and it was sacrificed. The blood was then taken by the high priest into the Holy of Holies and sprinkled on the mercy seat of the ark. So if we have our next slide of the Ark of the Covenant, on the top, the mercy seat, the blood was sprinkled there, and it signified the atonement, the covering of the sin of Israel. And then the other goat was released into the wilderness and signified the carrying away of the sin. And what's interesting, the book of Hebrews tells us in the New Testament that when Jesus died on the cross, in Hebrews chapter 9, it says he entered into the heavenly tabernacle, into the Holy of Holies, and sprinkled his blood on the mercy seat in the heavenly tabernacle in atonement for our sin.
Wow, and so that is something that's coming up also. This just falls on the heels of the Jewish New Year, the start of it.
Yes, there's 10 days between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. They're called the 10 fearful days in Judaism. The rabbis teach that during those 10 days, God is weighing your good and your bad, and if you're good enough, you get to live another year. But we know, the scripture says there is none righteous, no, not one. But it was that day where God said, hey, that's the day I'm going to take away your sin, but the only way he could do that was through the blood. The blood is only the thing that can make atonement for the sin.
And does it have any kind of significance or picture for believers?
Well, the 2 goats are interesting because remember when Jesus, as his trial, there was Jesus, and then there was another man, Barabbas. And Pilate says, who do you want me to release? And so that's a picture of those 2 goats. Barabbas was released. He was like the scapegoat, and he was allowed to go free. Jesus was sacrificed. The 2 goats are kind of symbolic also that he is sacrificed in our place and we're allowed to go free. It's also kind of interesting that name, Barabbas, is an Aramaic name, Bar meaning son, Abbas, Abba, the father, son of the father. So you had a man named, Barabbas, son of the Father, and then Jesus, son of the Father. One is sacrificed, the other is allowed to go free. He is sacrificed in our place. There's also an interesting Jewish tradition around Yom Kippur, and this is from the Talmud, the rabbinic writings, and they said a tradition developed over the years that they would tie a red string or ribbon around the horn of the scapegoat. And it says that in the Talmud, as this goat was being led away into the wilderness, that red ribbon would turn white to show that God had accepted the sacrifice. As he says in Isaiah, though your sin be as scarlet, it shall be white as snow. But then it says, 40 years before the temple was destroyed, remember the temple was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD, 40 years before that red ribbon, it stopped turning white. And that's written in the Talmud by rabbis who, they don't believe in Jesus, but what happened 40 years before the temple was destroyed? Jesus was sacrificed on the cross. Now we don't need to sacrifice animals. His sacrifice is the ultimate one that takes away sin.
Wow. And this kind of leads us to the 3rd Jewish holiday then.
Yes, Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles. Now prophetically, as the Feast of Trumpets speaks of the rapture, following the rapture, the Day of Atonement would typify and represent the 7-year tribulation period. The Day of Atonement was not a feast day. That was a day God said to Israel, afflict your souls. That was a mournful day, a day of fasting and affliction. And then Tabernacles, what happens after the 7-year tribulation? Jesus returns, he sets up his kingdom, and he will tabernacle among us. So prophetically, the Feast of Tabernacles speaks of that time when Jesus, God himself, in the person of Jesus, will dwell here on earth for 1,000 years.
The millennial kingdom.
Millennial kingdom.
Now, you brought also a slide with you, slide number 5, dealing with kind of a picture that's still being observed by Orthodox Jews here in the States even.
Yeah, God said to Israel for 7 days they're supposed to dwell in booths, a sukkah, and there you have a picture, I took that picture down in Skokie, Illinois, of a sukkah that you have built. When I lived on the kibbutz, we would go out and get the big palm branches and build a sukkah. And they have certain rules and regulations and things that they do about them. But it just reminds them of the time of dwelling in booths in the wilderness.
Anything else on these 3 holidays that would be important for our viewers to know?
Yeah, it's kind of a skeleton outline, just covers most of it.
Great. Well, let's kind of backtrack just a little bit on the feast here of trumpets here, and there is a slide that you brought with you too. It's slide number 6 about the Temple of Baal, and tell us about its significance here as we see some recreations taking place.
Yeah, it was, I think earlier this year or last year, I forget the exact date, but remember the ISIS, that terrorist group, they blew this temple up in Syria, just obliterated it. And so, people, of course, very upset about that, and rightfully so. But in the interest of, preservation of history, history buffs have decided to recreate the arch of this temple. Sometimes it's called the Temple of Palmyra, but what it was a temple to Baal, to worship of Baal. And Baal was, one of the worst gods that Israel ever went into worship, as they were sacrificing their children to Baal. This was strictly forbidden by God. And so again, in the interest of the preservation of history, they've decided to recreate this arch on a 3D, my understanding was this was done on a 3D printer over in China, the largest 3D printer in the world. And one was placed in London, England on the spring of this year, and then one just went up in New York City. I think you had the picture
right,
of
and
that.
we've got a picture here. If we can get a shot of this overhead here. This is the Syrian arch. This is a replica of this, and this was just put in the City Hall Park. This is in New York. And this is from the New York Times from just a week ago today.
Yeah, now what's interesting to me about this and how I think it has significance prophetically is that, remember when Israel was worshiping Baal, it was the time of Ahab and Jezebel. And Jezebel, that we're a wicked queen, and you had that whole confrontation between Elijah and the 400 prophets of Baal. And he says, you pray to your God, and I'll pray to my God, and then the God that calls down fire and from heaven and burns up the sacrifice, that's the true God. And that most of our viewers know that story, where the prophets of Baal, all morning, all day, they're calling on Baal, and he doesn't answer. But when Elijah prays to God, God, sends fire from heaven, burns up the sacrifice to show that he is the true God. They take the prophets of Baal down and then put them to death. But it was not long after that, what's interesting is that God takes Elijah to heaven in a whirlwind. So it's kind of interesting to me. I think we can kind of see a little parallel there, that it was just after Elijah confronted the prophets of Baal, God then takes him to heaven in the whirlwind. Here we are, Baal being revived again, and we're going to have to confront him. And couldn't this be another sign the rapture's getting ready to happen soon, that God's getting ready to take us to heaven? Because Elijah going to heaven in a whirlwind is a type and illustration of the church being raptured to heaven.
First in London, this past April 22nd. Now we have it here erected in New York City. And when we realize the horribleness of the human sacrifice and everything else that went on in Baal worship, why would we want to put this on display here on a nation that declares itself to be one nation under God?
Exactly, and my understanding is they have plans to put these in major cities all around the world.
Wow. Andy Ferrier is with us tonight. He's representative for the Midwest Messianic Center. A little bit later, we'll give you a point of contact to their website and other information. Andy, we continue to certainly monitor what is taking place with Israel right now. When you were with us this past spring, you had just mentioned an aspect of oil discovery in Israel, and we've got that on the slide here as well. But this is really significant because not only oil, but we're seeing Israel having rich natural gas deposits, and there is many are finding out the wealth that is there in this tiny little geographical area.
Yeah, exactly, and that it parallels Ezekiel chapter 38, talks about end-time Russian invasion of Israel, where Russia comes down from the north to attack Israel. And it says in Ezekiel 38, the reason they are coming is to take a spoil. Right? They have something that, it's financial wealth that Russia wants. And I remember hearing Bible prophecy speakers 40, 50 years ago saying, we should expect oil to be discovered in Israel. That would be the hook in the jaw. He talks about a hook in the jaw that pulls Russia down to invade Israel. And here it was, just last year, Fox News reported a groundbreaking discovery of oil up on the Golan Heights in Israel. Now, you mentioned the natural gas reserve. That was about 10 so years ago off the coast of Haifa. They've just now are starting to reap the benefits of that. And then, of course, we've known for years the mineral wealth of the Dead Sea, over $1 trillion. But then also there's a lot of technology coming out of Israel. If you look at the NASDAQ stock market here in America, the number 3 country in the world with companies on the NASDAQ is Israel. Isn't that amazing? Number 1, of course, America. Number 2, Canada. Number 3, that tiny little country of Israel. So tremendous amount of technology, natural resources that will be the hook in the jaw to bring Russia down. And this discovery, I think, is just hugely significant.
Yeah, and especially in light of this BDS movement that we have seen really taking place around the world, the boycott, divest, and sanction movement against Israel. And I mean, we are seeing church denominations here in the United States that are joining onto the BDS movement. We are seeing nations of the earth that are trying to be part of this. But if one even uses medical technology today, they're not boycotting Israel. I mean, we're very thankful to Israel for the technology advances that we have through those who are Israelites.
If you want to boycott Israel, you're going to have to throw away your cell phone, your computer. You're going to have to live out in the woods somewhere. Stephen Hawking, one of the foremost atheists in the world, joined the BDS boycott of Israel. But somebody pointed out to him, hey, wait a minute, Stephen, you need a computer to speak. And guess where that computer chip was made? In Israel.
Wow, significant. Well, as we mentioned, not only are we seeing this BDS movement that's been gaining root, but we are also seeing a worldwide anti-Semitism, if you would, an anti-Israel hatred bias that has been growing. And you've got another slide with you here this evening. I believe it's number 8, in which we are even seeing a buildup take place on Israel's north border. Tell us what we're seeing there.
So one of the reasons we're seeing this, worldwide anti-Semitism, this was prophesied. God said, I'm going to gather all nations will come against Israel, against Jerusalem. And part of that is, it's this battle that's going on between God and Satan, this spiritual warfare that, we can't see, but it's very real. And Satan knows that, when he was defeated by Jesus, when Jesus died on the cross, and so now really the only way Satan can win in, this war is to destroy Israel, because God has made promises to Israel that have not been fulfilled. So if Satan can destroy them, then he can win, and that's what he does in the end times. He tries, the very last battle, in fact, in the book of Revelation, the Battle of Armageddon, really should be called the Battle for Jerusalem, because while the armies are gathered to Armageddon, just north of Jerusalem, the armies of the Antichrist then come down and they take Jerusalem, Zechariah 14 says, and then when it looks like, Satan's going to win, it looks like Israel's going to be destroyed, that's when Jesus returns and he stops the war and saves Israel and sets up his kingdom. But even now we're seeing, if you see that slide, this is just reported on Debka.com, where they're seeing a massive buildup on the northern border of Israel with Syria, Hezbollah, Hamas, Iran moving in there. Ezekiel 38:5, Iran is one of the countries mentioned, also known as Persia, as joining Russia, coming down against Israel. It mentions the House of Togarmah, which is probably Turkey. Turkey used to be an ally with Israel, but I think it was about 5 or so years ago, is now allied with Iran and turned against Israel. And according to this article on Debka, they are preparing for a massive invasion of Israel. Well, that is Ezekiel 38, and most Bible scholars believe that the rapture will happen before this invasion, and as we see this invasion, a lot of people are saying this could happen this year. Wow, how close could we be to the rapture?
Wow. Let's look at history past as well. Haven't we seen invasion of or war against Israel take place during these religious celebrations as well, during these Israeli holidays?
Yeah, well, 1973, Israel was invaded on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the most holy day in the Jewish year. As on that day, Jewish people around the world are fasting. It was on that day in 1973 that some of the surrounding Arab nations invaded, and their goal, was to drive the Jews into the ocean. And the reason they picked that day is they knew that Jewish people would be in prayer and synagogue. They would be very weak from their fasting, 24-hour fast. And it was really kind of a miracle they won that war. So as we're heading to this fall time, wow, there's some big things that could be coming up.
I think it's also interesting, Andy, to observe some of the alliances that are taking place. I mean, since we had President Obama grant this Iran deal, and we are seeing, of course, vast sums of money that have gone to the U.S. that Iran is now using for military capability, putting in their defense, that at the same time we are seeing Russia being very much involved with Iran as well, as far as providing the military planes and other weaponry that I guess what we see is some alliances taking place there that seem to bring about what we see take place in Ezekiel 38 and 39.
Yeah, absolutely. I read one article that said that a lot of that money that we gave Iran on the hostage deal, they purchased, it was like 12 missiles, huge missiles, and they wrote on the side of them, "Death to Israel." And so
wow.
they're getting ready to use those. A possible scenario, the thing that's holding Russia back really is America. I think most people agree with that. We held them back in '73. In fact, in the Yom Kippur War, Russia, said, "Hey, if you don't stop Israel, we'll intervene." And so we've been holding Russia back. But if you think what is going to happen to our country in the rapture of the church, this country will be really absolutely devastated. I think the rapture hurts America more than any country in the world because we have Christians in high positions of government, business, and the military. And so if the rapture, possible scenario, the rapture happens, this country is thrown into chaos. I think Russia might see that as their opportunity to come down, the hook in the jaw, so to speak. And as they come down, Ezekiel 38 says that as they invade Israel, God rains fire from heaven and just completely wipes out that invading army. That then paves the way for the Antichrist to go to Israel, confirm the covenant, and that starts the 7-year tribulation period. What are people going to think when finally we have peace in Israel? If Russia's taken out and Iran, radical Islam, and we have peace in Israel, what is the world going to think? Wow, finally peace and safety. But 1 Thessalonians 5, when they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction comes.
You mentioned about the United States often coming to the aid of Israel, and certainly has been perhaps her best ally through the years. You brought another slide with you here tonight about the United States taking some of our jets, our U.S. nukes, away out of Turkey?
Yeah, I mean, I was totally unaware of this. It's from Debka.com was reporting this, that apparently our country, America, we had tactical nukes in southern Turkey, and the Obama administration has apparently removed those, and it's kind of like he's just paving the way for Russia, saying, hey, you want to go down and take Israel, be my guest. It's all set up. I mean, everything is in place for this great battle, Ezekiel chapter 38. And
by the way, this is slide number 9 here to our producer. There we go.
Another interesting thing, too, it's not being reported at all, is with this circus we have here in America with the election that's been going on for some months. Again, the Obama administration very quietly has been working behind the scenes, pushing very strongly. They want to get a peace deal done with Israel and the Palestinians before the president leaves office. Now, all the presidents have tried to do this. None of them have been able to do it. They've all failed. But the difference this time is that Obama is willing to back the Palestinians and not Israel. In the past, we've always stood by Israel, but now the Obama administration said, hey, well, they want to force this deal on Israel. Well, that very well could be what Daniel is describing in Daniel 9:27 when he talks about the Antichrist confirming the covenant with Israel. And the fact that he wants to get that done before he leaves office, we can't be dogmatic and say for sure, but that very well could be the event that, that is the event that could trigger the start of the tribulation. And of course, then the rapture happens before that.
Just a week or so ago, we saw in the headlines stories coming out about the United States giving this record amount of money to Israel to help with her defense and so forth. But all the little details were not really exposed to the public. It goes beyond just the finance, but what else is involved with that? Did Israel have to agree to a brokered peace deal? Some would call it the two-state solution and so forth. We don't know all the details that are there at this point. But do we know whether Israel is going to give up more land in order to have peace? There's not much land yet for her to give.
Yeah, there's 100 ways this could play out. We'll just have to wait and see how it all happens. Mm-hmm. But something's going to have to do also, though, with the rebuilding of the temple in Jerusalem, because the Old and New Testament says that there's going to be a rebuilt temple. It'll be built by Orthodox Jews who reject the sacrifice mm-hmm. of Jesus. They'll start making those sacrifices again. And those sacrifices, of course, will not be pleasing to God because we have the sacrifice of Jesus. Mm-hmm. But then it's in the middle of the tribulation, the Antichrist breaks the covenant with Israel, goes into the rebuilt temple, sets himself up as God. And the group in Israel called the Temple Institute just announced that they basically have everything now ready to go to rebuild. They finished the stone altar. And that's one reason we're seeing these stabbings in the city of Jerusalem is the Muslims have found out that, hey, the Jews, they're getting ready to rebuild their temple. And so that's one reason we've been seeing all this unrest and stabbings over there. So, everything is just falling into place.
Right. Well, Andy, you've got a lot of information that's very enlightening and informative, and through your ministry, you actually go out and speak to churches in a more detailed fashion and present messages on not only Israel, but on prophetical events here for the future as well. And you also have a lot of information on your website from Midwest Messianic Center there as well. So give us some contact information if you would.
Well, folks can go on our website, www.midwestmessianic.com, and there's contact information there. You can also reach me on my cell phone, 847-409-9009, or by email. Just email me personally, aferrier@sbcglobal.net. Okay,
so again, the number there on the screen, 847-409-9009. And the website, MidwestMessianic.com, MidwestMessianic.com. Tonight we would like to open our phone lines. Perhaps you have some questions about some of the material and information discussed this evening, and we welcome your phone calls. Our number here is 414-935-3030. That's 414-935-3030. Toll free, you can reach us at 800-733-8830. That's 800-733-8830. We invite your phone calls tonight. Perhaps you have a comment, a question about some of the materials covered tonight, about the fall feast, about Israel and the nation being in the news, the buildup that is occurring, the anti-Semitic attitude that's been building worldwide as well. So pick up your phone, give us a call tonight, 414-935-3030, or toll free at 800-733-8830. Phone lines are open, and we welcome your calls here this evening to have you speak with Andy Ferrier on some of these very, very important issues. Andy, we are seeing certainly the Prime Minister of Israel was just here in the United States and spoke to the United Nations. Not too complimentary of a speech that he had, but certainly it was one that he warned that there's been this attitude against Israel, and he said that's going to change.
Well, unfortunately, it's not going to change. We'd love it to change. We see the world more accepting of Israel, but in the end times, it's not going to happen. In fact, I lived in Israel for 3 years, and one time we were camping out at Masada, which is a fortress that Herod built down by the Dead Sea, and it's way up on a high mountain. And the Israeli paratroopers go up there after they take their vows. And they say, never again. What they mean by never again is never another Holocaust. We don't ever want to be a Holocaust like Hitler, where they killed 1/3 of the Jews. But Scripture tells us there's going to be another Holocaust. It's going to be during that 7-year tribulation period. Zechariah 13:8 says that 2/3 of the Jewish people will be killed during that time, but then 1/3 will come through God uses that time to refine Israel. They then recognize, call on Jesus as their Messiah. That brings him to his return, and then to set up his kingdom, and then that brings that 1,000-year peace on earth.
414-935-3030 is our telephone number. That's 414-935-3030. Toll free at 800-733-8830. We have Barbara calling from Brookfield. Hi, Barbara, you're on the air.
Hi, Jim. Gee, this has been an awesome program this evening. I have learned so much from just these few minutes I've been watching. I haven't heard one thing either in the newspaper or any of the, like, CBS or NBC or any of the newscasts about stabbings in Jerusalem. It's just like, it's just not happening. You don't hear about it. You hear about all the things that are going on here in the United States, and that one man that killed 9 people stabbing, but I hadn't heard about Jerusalem. And I'm so excited and so grateful that this man is on with you tonight, because he's really exposing a lot of things that I don't know if it's deliberate by the news broadcasters, that they are just avoiding reporting it or what. But honestly, I have not heard any of this. Thank you so much, and I'm going to be quiet now and listen to you two. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for the call. Very interesting. And several weeks ago, I was on the phone with a gentleman by the name of David Rubin, the former mayor of Shiloh, Israel. He's in Samaria and what's known as the West Bank by most of the world, and revealed, it was happening at the time when I interviewed him, almost on a daily occurrence, the stabbings that were taking place. And international media has not been very quick to point these things out, and part of the anti-Israel bias in that regard.
Yeah, another example, I was in Israel 2 years ago, and went with a group of 28 evangelical Christians to do volunteer work in Kaplan Hospital in Rehovot near Tel Aviv. And the first week we were there, Hamas fired about 80 rockets on some of these southern cities in Israel. And over the past 12 years, they've fired over 12,000 rockets at these cities. In our group, we donated 2 bomb shelters to one of those cities, a little city called Netivot. And we went down the following week, and we visited that little city. Fortunately, there wasn't another rocket attack while we were there. And they said that when there's a rocket fired, that's from the Gaza Strip. I wish we had a map on it, but there's an alarm that goes off when the rocket is fired, and when that alarm goes off, the people in that city have all of 10 seconds to find shelter.
Right.
Some of the other cities have a little more time, 30 seconds, but the people were so grateful that, for us to donate this bomb shelter to the people. But who does the United Nations condemn on most of these attacks? What's interesting is the United Nations has passed more resolutions against Israel than against all of the other countries in the world combined.
Wow.
And yet, Israel has done, when this earthquake that was over in, Italy? Israel was one of the first people there to help. The earthquake in Haiti years ago, and the one in Nepal. Israel was one of the first countries there to help people. They're doing all that they can, humanitarianly. But that, again, that's what we should expect for the end times, the world turning against Israel.
Wow. We've got some open phone lines here tonight, 414-935-3030, 414-935-3030, or 800-733-8830. Take your calls here this evening, questions that you have as it relates to Israel, as it relates to Bible prophecy, as it relates to the fall holidays here as well, which get underway just a few days from right now. And the lines are open, 414-935-3030 or 800-733-8830. Andy, we see these things, but we also see other noticeable things around the world as well. As Scripture talks, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. And when we observe what's happening on so many different fronts, we are witnesses of those very issues. I think just of how in Genesis, during the times of Noah, it talks about how man did that which was continuously evil in his heart, with things that were left to their own imagination. Aren't we seeing that happen today as well?
Yeah, and not only that, Noah built an ark in his day, and we got Ken Ham just built an ark down in Kentucky, and my wife and I were there a few weeks ago, and it was just phenomenal. I'd encourage all our viewers to go down there and go through that. It was just really neat. But yeah, everything that Jesus talked about in Noah's day, we're absolutely seeing it come to pass. But also, Jesus, he compared that, in Matthew 24, as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be in his return. He says people were eating, drinking, marrying, giving in marriage, and knew not till the flood came. So kind of what he's saying is life is going to be going on, somewhat normal. Yeah, the world's going to be really wicked, but people are just going to be carrying on and going on as normal. And then, boom, the rapture comes and the tribulation starts, and all hell breaks loose, and people are going to be caught totally off guard. And I'll tell you what, if the rapture had happened back in the 70s in this country, a lot of people, I think, knew about it, but it seems like we're in an age of such biblical illiteracy that most people today, when it happens, they won't have a clue what has happened.
Let's go to Ken calling from Racine. Hi, Ken, you're on the air.
Yeah. Let's see. What do you happen to know the biblical meaning of the number 4?
Okay, well, we're dealing more with Israel here tonight and Bible prophecy. What point are you trying to make here tonight, Ken?
Well, it's a private thing here, but I didn't know what I was tuning into when I tuned in.
Okay, you just keep watching, okay? Let's go to Barbara in Greenfield. Hi, Barbara, you're on the air.
Hi. Are we getting closer to the mark of the beast?
It's an interesting question in light of the technology that makes that possible, doesn't it?
Yeah, the technology is all there, of course. It's hard to say what exactly it's going to be. A retinal eye scan, a thumbprint, a fingerprint. Now have whole hand scans. They have computer chips they can put under your skin. I heard that the United Nations has a plan to have everybody in the world chipped by the year 2017. I doubt that that's going to happen, but the technology for sure is there. And when you think about this too, that the mark of the beast doesn't take place until the middle of the tribulation. That's, so then the rapture is at least 3.5 years before that. And as we see, people are already putting computer chips under their skin. And as you see this becoming more and more accepted, that tells us, it's also definitely a sign the rapture must be very soon.
As we're also fast approaching a cashless society as well.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you.
We're going next to Judy in Waukesha. You're on the air, Judy.
Yes, good evening. First of all, Jim and Andy, thank you so much. I'm being informed, as so many are. And what I wanted to ask, someone related to me that Netanyahu, the Prime Minister, and Donald Trump had a meeting and that it went really marvelously well. Do you know whether that's true or not?
That's my understanding as well from Breaking Israel News, a story that happened there that Donald Trump was indeed recognizing Jerusalem as being the capital of Israel, something that the present administration is not doing by virtue of the fact that they're not allowing our embassy to move to Jerusalem. It's in Tel Aviv.
Yeah, Trump is, from what I've heard, very pro-Israel. But the thing about the embassy is also, I'm glad you brought that up, is very interesting because every year the president, whoever it is, Clinton did it, Bush did it, Obama's done it, they sign a delay of moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Israel is the only country in the world where our embassy is not in their capital. And it's really, because they say, hey, Jerusalem's our capital, and there's this whole controversy over Jerusalem. Well, as again, the scripture, God says, I'm going to make Jerusalem a cup of trembling. And that's the way it is today. Everybody wants Jerusalem, and we can't solve all these problems, and it all has to do with Jerusalem. So, yeah, it's definitely another sign of the end times.
Thanks, Judy.
Yes, sir. Good night now.
Bye-bye. We're going to Brad in West Dallas. Hi, Brad.
Hi, Jim. Yeah, it's ridiculous that people think it's normal that foreigners be allowed to choose the capital for Israel. That's unbelievable. But as far as that one caller that called up and said, I can't believe this. I never heard this before. Well, I wouldn't hold my breath waiting to hear it on the major media.
Yeah.
They're not interested in the truth. They tell you what they want you to hear, and if they don't like it, you're not going to hear it. I knew about these stabbings many months ago. I was on a website called Ynet News, and I don't know if it's in Israel, if that's supposed to be liberal or conservative website or not, but they got a lot of what's going on there, and this stuff has been going on for a long time. And on the regular media, nobody hears about it over here. You say something to them, and they're either silent or they look at you like you're kind of weird or something. But that's the way it is with the truth nowadays, I guess.
Yeah, I know Ynet's been carrying it. IsraelNationalNews.com, another source that's been talking about the stabbings. I mean, the news is out there, but major media here in the U.S. is not picking up on it.
JPost, JerusalemPost.com, another good site. Yeah, and the one I mentioned, Debka.com, Israeli military intelligence, very interesting.
Hey, thanks for the point, Brad.
Thank you.
Our phone number, 935-3030. That's 414-935-3030. Toll free at 800-733-8830. We're going next to Anthony, who is calling from Milwaukee. Hi, Anthony. You're on the air.
Hi. I'd like to ask the host, how can the Ark be completed without the Ark of the Covenant? I'm going to hang up.
I'm sorry. How can the what be completed?
You mean the temple?
How can the temple be completed?
The temple. Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Yeah, they do not have to have it for rebuilding the temple, because the fact is that in the days of Jesus, Herod's temple, the second temple, there was no ark there either. Josephus, the Jewish historian, wrote about this, that when the Romans, when they destroyed the temple, that when they went into the Holy of Holies, it was completely empty. And you say, well, what happened to it? Well, the ark disappeared when the first temple was destroyed, Solomon's temple, when the Babylonians came, took Jerusalem captive, 586 BC, destroyed the city of Jerusalem. The ark disappeared. And it hasn't been found since. They've been looking for it. Back in the early 90s, Orthodox Jews were digging under the Temple Mount trying to find it. Of course, we all know that Indiana Jones found it. But the thing is, they really don't have to have it. I mean, if they found it, it would be the archaeological find of the millennium. But they do not have to have that for rebuilding. All the other pieces of furniture have been remade. The golden menorah, the altar of incense, the table of showbread, wood overlaid with pure gold, spending millions of dollars to rebuild and remake this stuff. The ark they will not remake, but the fact is they really do not have to have it for rebuilding the temple.
And just for those who, so we don't confuse some viewers, we're not talking about Noah's Ark, we're talking about the Ark of the Covenant, two totally separate things.
Yeah,
if we can go back to that slide that has the ark on it, there we have a picture of it. And this is the ark that you're talking about here, Andy, as far as the Ark of the Covenant.
Exactly. That was in the Holy of Holies in the inner room of the temple. That was where the high priest went on Yom Kippur to sprinkle the blood. And it's interesting that, remember, in the time of King Saul, they brought the ark, when Eli was the priest, high priest of Israel, and they were fighting against the Philistines, and they were losing this war. So they said, well, let's take the ark out, and that'll help us in the battle. And it didn't, because they weren't living for the Lord. And the Philistines actually captured the ark, and you have two whole chapters in the Bible, a story about this. So the ark was actually in Philistine territory for a while, and God afflicted them with all kinds of plagues, and they said, well, we got to send the ark back to Israel. And so they send it back to Israel in its rightful place. But when the Babylonians came, destroyed Jerusalem, there is absolutely no record of what happened to the ark. Now, Orthodox Jews believe that Solomon, in his wisdom, foresaw a time that Israel would fall into disobedience, and that a foreign country would come and invade. And so they believe, in his foresight, he made a special chamber for the ark to be hidden under the Temple Mount. And that's why the Orthodox were digging under there. But when they did that, there was a big riot, and so the police had to come. They shut everything down. So it's really doubtful that we'll ever find it. But again, it's not needed. They didn't have it in the second temple, and it's not really needed.
Okay. Priestly garments are also being made?
They're all completed. In fact, also, they just reported If you go to the templeinstitute.org, their website, they're just reporting that the holy oil for use in the menorah. I remember when they went into the first room in the temple, there was the golden menorah with the 7 branches, and they had to have special oil dedicated for use for that, and they have just done that just very, very recently. They now have Orthodox Jewish men from the priestly family of the tribe of Levi studying in Jerusalem how to be priests and Levi, how to make these sacrifices again. All the tribes of Israel, the 12 tribes, they've all lost their identity except the tribe of Levi. And the way they've kept that is through their last name. If you meet a Jewish person who's a derivative of, Levi, Levitz, Levinson, Cohen, they're the priestly family within the tribe of Levi. They've kept their identity. And Israel did a worldwide search of these guys. They sent letters to them and say, hey, would you be willing to come to Jerusalem, minister in the temple? And they now have a group of them studying, training, and so they're ready to go. And then it was earlier this year, for Passover, they took 4 goats and just outside the city of Jerusalem, they sacrificed these. This was called like a trial run, a practice sacrifice for Passover. So when they do get the temple, they'll be able to start making these sacrifices. So again, everything is set, everything is in place for the rebuilding.
You mentioned the oil, and I just had come across a story from BreakingIsraelNews.com dated September 26. That's pretty current. It says, though it's impossible to say with absolute certainty when the Messiah will come, in an ancient synagogue in Jerusalem's Old City, a shofar and jug of oil are patiently waiting on a high shelf for his arrival. Very interesting indeed. I mean, that's current news.
Yeah. It's,
Let's go back to the lines. By the way, our number 414-935-3030, 800-733-8830. We've got another caller online. Hi, you're on the air.
Hi. I was just going to make a comment that I was in a Israel tour last October to early November, and we went through the Temple Institute looking at the objects for the temple, and the person who was giving the tour, he was not in person but only by audio, and he said, we know where the ark is, we have it, and we know where it is. So that was my comment.
Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, some of them are pretty dogmatic. They think they know where it is. We'll just have to wait and see.
If they do, it's not public, is it?
Yeah, they haven't been able to. Again, the typical Orthodox view is it's under the Temple Mount, and I have heard the similar reports. A rabbi claimed that he saw it, but if they did, they weren't able to get it.
Well, Andy, in light of all the things we've talked about the Jewish fall holidays that are starting very soon upon us, the Jewish New Year and so forth. In light of the things that sure appear to be fulfillment of Bible prophecy as relates to the very prizes that Israel is finding, the rich natural resources, and in light of the armies that are building up, the coalitions against Israel, the anti-Semitic mindset, the anti-Israel mindset that is building all over this globe, bring that home to us. So what? What should that mean to us here today? What does it mean for just a common, ordinary person, perhaps people tonight who don't even know Christ as Savior? I think this should be a wake-up call.
Yeah, it really sure should. And, the Scripture says, though the vision tarry, wait for it, it will come. We've been waiting for, the rapture and these things, the end times to be fulfilled for many, many years. But eventually it's going to happen. In 2 Peter, Peter said that in the end times, scoffers will come, scoffing, mocking, walking after their own lusts, and saying, where's the promise of his coming? And it was just, remember in 2011 when this camping, I think it was camping, put these billboards all around the world.
Judgment Day.
Yeah, the rapture was going to happen in May, and of course it didn't happen. Well, you had some atheists that put some billboards up scoffing, mocking about the rapture and the second coming and saying, you Christians, you've been talking about that for years and it hasn't happened. Well, Peter says, hey, when they scoff and mock like that, that's when it's going to happen. And so I've even got some Christian friends, like, oh, yeah, we've been talking about the rapture for years and it hasn't happened. Well, Isaiah and Jeremiah and these prophets, they predicted the fall of Jerusalem for over 100 years before it finally happened. But the fact is, it finally did happen. It did come. And while it's been, we've been talking about the rapture for many years, eventually it is going to happen. And every day we go, we get closer. So as believers in Jesus, we need to be getting the word out. Hey, that Jesus is coming soon. We need to be living for him. If you're out, for people out in the audience, if you're not ready for the rapture, you're not ready for Jesus to come, the time is very short. You need to get ready. And I like what D.L. Moody said, though. Somebody asked D.L. Moody once, if you knew the rapture was going to happen tomorrow, how would that change your life? What would you do different? And he said, I wouldn't do anything different. So that's really the way we should be living our lives.
Just as Jesus came the first time when the fullness of time was come, the second time as well. We're going to squeeze one last call in. Frank, go ahead. You're on the air.
Okay. I just... Jim Schneider, is that your name?
Yeah, very quickly. We're almost out of time.
Okay. I just got through reading the book by Doug Woodward, The Next Great War in the Middle East. Russia prepares to fulfill the prophecy of Gog and Magog. And what I found interesting was the time period between, World War III. He believes that World War III will break out first. And that could it'd be a one-day war, but it would take up to 7 years to clean up the mess. So there'd be a longer period of time before Armageddon kicks in.
Yeah, and I guess that's something that's speculation. That's something we don't know about, is it?
Well, Armageddon is at the end of the 7-year tribulation, no doubt about that. There's differences of opinion on the Ezekiel 38 battle. I personally believe it's going to happen sometime before the start of the tribulation period.
Okay. We don't know that it's going to be World War III as such. But
it's not going to be a world war because the countries involved in that battle are listed right there in that chapter, and it's just a handful of countries, so it's not really a world war.
We are out of time here, Frank. We do have to run, but let's give the contact information here again. Andy Ferrier, our guest, Midwest Messianic Center. You see a mailing address there, but the quickest way would be to go to the website midwestmessianic.com, midwestmessianic.com, or 847-409-9009.
If they'd like to receive our monthly newsletter, phone, email me, go to the website. We'd love to send out our monthly newsletter.
Very good. Just ask for that when you contact them. Andy, thanks for being back.
Hey, thank you, Jim.
Folks, indeed, exciting times that we're living in, but look up. Your redemption draws nigh, is what we're told in Scripture, and the Lord is going to come back. He promised it. The question is, are you ready? Good night. Thanks for joining us on inFocus.